See how high those are spiking? That's, to me, that's not really what I would consider safe. Bear with me, I'm going to put the phone down because this doesn't have a stop-start, so hang in there. It's another phone with my same video. So these are 3 different phones in the household. This is what we put along our heads, or what we're dousing ourselves with, you guys, when we are watching YouTube videos. See what happens when I put all of them. Hang on. Let's see if we can get my video here. And yeah, these are the readings you all are getting when you've got your cell phone on. Now these are milliwatts per meter squared. And again, according to Trifield's Labs, Alpha Lab, they state anything over 0.200 has health effects. All right, just showing you. Wait, hang on. Now I'm going to get my phone. Just a second, phone. So when you guys are watching people live or whatever near your cell phones, these are the readings you're getting. So now I'm going to turn my cell phone off. Bear with me. Cell phones away. And this is what the meter reads. So we're reading the radio frequencies. And now this is what it shows. So it shows you how high these readings are. We just got one spike. Anyhow, just sharing. So I'm going to look real quick at this Science Direct regarding EMFs. So one article I found, Electromagnetic Fields Stress Living Cells, and Martin Blank and Reba Goodman. And this is just the abstract, so I'm just going to read a quick couple sentences here. So electromagnetic fields, EMF, in both ELF, that's extremely low frequency, and radio frequency, RF ranges. And those RF ranges are what I was just showing you on my cell phones. Activate the cellular stress response, a protective mechanism that induces the expression of stress response genes, e.g. HSP70, and increased levels of stress proteins. The 20 different stress protein families are evolutionarily conserved and act as chaperones in the cell when they help repair and refold damaged proteins and transport them across cell membranes. Induction of stress response involves activation of DNA, and despite the large difference in energy between ELF and RF, the same cellular pathways respond in both frequency ranges. Oh, there's my rooster. Specific DNA sequence on promoter of this is a specific gene, the stress gene, are responsive to electromagnetic frequencies, and studies with model biochemical systems suggest that EMF could interact directly with electrons in DNA. While low energy EMF interacts with DNA to induce the stress response, increasing EMF energy in the RF range can lead to breaks in DNA strands. So if people don't think that these radio frequencies that are spiking in our high are damaging to our health, I think they need to do a little bit more studying. This says, it is clear that in order to protect living cells, EMF safety limits must be changed from the current thermal standard based on energy to one based on biological responses that occur long before the threshold for thermal changes. Here's another abstract, Electromagnetic Fields and DNA Damage. Just says, a major concern for the adverse effects of exposure to non-ionizing electromagnetic EMF is cancer induction. Now here's a concerning study here. It says, increased blood-brain barrier permeability in mammalian brain 7 days after exposure to the radiation of or from a GSM 900 mobile phone. So I don't know if this mobile phone would be any more different or specific to ours, but here we go. I'm going to read this to you. I'm sorry about that. I didn't have my headphones in, so I'm not sure if you guys heard that, but this is what I'm going to read next. Okay, so this is the abstract. So microwaves were for the first time produced by humans in 1886 when radio waves were broadcasted and received. Until then, microwaves had only existed as a part of the cosmic background radiation since the birth of the universe. By the following utilizations of microwaves in telegraph communications, radars, television, and above all, in the modern mobile phone technology, mankind is today exposed to microwaves at a level up to 10 to the 20th power times. Is that just 1020 times the original background radiation since the birth of the universe? Our group has earlier shown that the electromagnetic radiation emitted by mobile phones alters the permeability of blood-brain barrier, there B3 there, resulting in albumin extravasation. So albumin extravasation, I can't even say that, extravasation. So you want to know what that is, you guys? Well, basically, albumin is a protein made by the liver, and extravasation is the leaking of that into the cells. But I'm going to show you more specifically. So albumin is a family of globular proteins, the most common of which are the serum albumins, and the proteins of the albumin family are water-soluble, moderately soluble in concentrated salt solutions, that would be our blood, and experience heat denaturation. Albumins are commonly found in blood plasma and differ from other blood proteins in that they are not glycosylated. I don't know what that means. Something to do with sugar. Substances containing albumins also called albuminoids. So check this out. So extravasation is the leakage of fluid out of its container into the surrounding area, especially blood or blood cells from vessels. This almost sounds like AIDS, Ebola, doesn't it? Thanks, whoever, Fauci, whatever. In the case of inflammation, it refers to the movement of white blood cells from the capillaries to the tissues surrounding them. In the case of malignant cancer metastasis, it refers to cancer cells exiting the capillaries and entering organs. It's frequently used in medical contexts, either referring to urine or to blood. So, the leaking of fluid out of its container into the surrounding area. So basically, your blood cells start leaking. Okay, so they basically said, so the mobile phones alter the permeability of blood-brain barrier resulting in albumin extravasation immediately and 14 days after 2 hours of exposure. Any of you guys stay on the cell phones watching YouTube or any videos for over 2 hours? So in the background section of this report, we present a thorough review of literature on the demonstrated effects or lack of effects of microwave exposure upon BBB. So they state that they continued their own studies. And down here, albumin extravasation was enhanced in the mobile phone exposed rats as compared to sham controls after the 7-day recovery period. Let's see, so they used a specific test, but it did show that the albumin extravasation was enhanced. So this reads, the present findings are in agreement with our earlier studies where we have seen increased BBB, blood-brain barrier, permeability immediately and 14 days after exposure. That's just for 2 hours. So it states the radiation upon blood-brain barrier, permeability of rats 7 days after one exposure of 2 hours of exposure. So for 14 days, they're still getting the effects. I got this, I found this fiercewireless.com, and it just shows maps on the bandwidth and stuff. So this is a total 5G licensed spectrum under FCC control, total available spectrum. So this is 5G licensed in the United States. And I'll show you the so there you go. So the United States is going to be pretty well lit, I'd say. With 5G. And this reads, many vendors and some operators have sought special temporary authority, STA, to conduct millimeter wave band tests in various U.S. markets. Some operators already own some high band spectrum rights. T-Mobile US, for example, has spectrum holdings in 28 GHz and 39 GHz bands, and is moving forward with 5G tests and trials this year. If its acquisition of XO Communications is approved, Verizon would be able to lease of XO's spectrum in the 28 GHz and 39 GHz bands with option to buy before the end of 2018. It's worth noting that while T-Mobile and Verizon have ties to the upper band spectrum, neither has millimeter wave licenses that cover the entire country. So I've seen some towers that don't even have license. So let's see, neither has millimeter wave license. According to AllNet Insights and Analytics, AT&T doesn't hold any of the higher band spectrum, and Sprint has some. So I'm skipping to this copradar.com, radio frequency biological effects. This is interesting. This states, natural radiation was the only source of human exposure until the latter part of the 19th century when Thomas Edison invented the electric light. So in this interaction of fields and biological systems, okay, the page is so broad, so I'm just going to, you're only going to see part of the page. So some studies indicate there are reactions to RF exposure, that's radio frequency exposure, not explained by thermal heating. Strong RF fields heat tissue by vibrating molecules of the tissue. Weaker fields can induce electrical currents in or on tissue. The stronger the field, the larger the induced current. Electrical and magnetic fields can produce weak Lorentz forces that may affect charged particles, ions on a molecular scale. The Lorentz force is the force on a charged particle in motion due to the presence of an electrical and magnetic field, and may boost or inhibit cell chemistries by pumping ions. Listed below is a sample of some observed effects of electromagnetic radiation on living cells. Most, if not all, effects depend greatly on frequency, modulation, and magnitude in the field, or of the field, So these are the observed effects, a sample of observed effects of electromagnetic radiation on living cells. So split DNA molecules in the brains of laboratory mice, parallel chain, randomly suspended particles such as fat globules and E. coli bacteria align with each other in the direction of the field. Non-spherical particles such as E. coli line up either perpendicular or parallel to electric field depending on frequency. And if anyone is familiar with the blood cell analysis, the live blood cell analysis, you'll also see stacking of the red blood cells, which is interesting. Particle movement, change in natural shape of cells, that's also the spikiness that you see sometimes in a red blood cell. That shows oxidative stress. Anytime a cell kind of spikes, a little star shape, that's oxidative stress. So also cell death from membrane damage, fusion in cells. And remember, basically, disease there's one disease, and that's cellular malfunction. So, and there's two pathways, either toxicity or deficiency. So if you can't get, nutrients in a cell or toxins out of a cell, you're going to have, disease. So cell death from membrane damage. Anyhow, so RF radiation has been linked to biochemical effects, immunological effects, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease. That Alzheimer's, that's one thing that the bees are having a problem with, is they get lost in the directions. So Parkinson's disease, cancer, cataracts, EEG effects. We've seen in the Department of Defense where they basically said they said EMFs flatten EEG lines. That's your brain waves. And behavioral changes, to name a few. Studies from old Soviet military suggest that some frequencies and modulations cause behavioral changes in humans. In 1990, now this is interesting, in 1990 the U.S. military was reported to be planning microwave radiation experiments on animals to study behavioral effects. Now I found this interesting. So U.S. Air Force sponsored a study of rats, kind of appropriate, exposed to pulsed microwaves of 24.5 gigahertz. Police band radars operate near the frequency of 24.5 gigahertz. The study used pulsed microwaves and police radar. The studies used pulsed microwaves and police radar is continuous. The research was conducted by the University of Washington School of Medicine in Seattle and published in 1984. The study showed a significant increase in malignant tumors and noted effects of the adrenal glands and the entire endocrine system. So, the adrenal glands, maybe that's why the cops tend to be a little over-aggressive. Maybe they're being nailed by the radio frequencies. Anyone ever thought of that? So, police radar is continuous. So again, this 1998 study, look at that. You could add that 1 plus 8 is 9, and then flip it upside down. You can do the rest. So the London Times reported in 1998 that Dr. Henry Lay, an expert in non-ionizing radiation and professor at School of Medicine and College of Engineering at the University of Washington, Seattle. You guys notice how Seattle has all the defense companies, and that's where Starbucks was started, and caffeine has a super high effect. It makes you more sensitive to EMFs. That's a whole nother story. Look at that guy, Schultz. Anyhow, it announced that low-level microwave radiation can split DNA molecules in the brains of laboratory mice. DNA is deoxynucleic acid, DNA, a complex, usually helical-shaped chemical compound that is the substance that makes the organic matter of genes and chromosomes. That's pretty important, don't you think? Splitting DNA molecule in the brain is associated with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease and cancer. The cellular telephone industry supported Dr. Lay's research grant, but suppressed the report's publication. I wonder why. Anyhow, this goes on about how the nerves are affected, the EEG, that's your brain waves, are affected. So people keep trying to tell us that these frequencies coming from the cell towers and the cell phones, are no big deal. They're not reading the research, I think. So I'm going to look at this report next. We're getting a little long here, so I'll probably stop this and start it again. Look at the Quadrennial Defense Report, Review Report. This was the February 2010, an interesting Department of Defense. That's the same, isn't that the same year that the Kissinger report came out, the depopulation? There's a lot to look at in this report. So the way ahead and Chairman's assessment of the 2010 Quadrennial Defense Review, page 99. Remember I covered the Pentagon in my last video? Penta being five stars, 5 points, on a star. This talks about the Quadrennial Defense Review represents an important step towards fully institutionalizing the ongoing reform and reshaping of America's military. This is truly a wartime QDR. Talks about fighting America's wars and their families on the battlefield, in the hospital. They sure have plans for us. In this report, just an observation I made, they use the word broad quite a bit. Now, broad can also be switched around to mean the word board, as in board members or such. So I wanted to keep that in mind. So given this threat environment, the United States needs a broad portfolio of military capabilities with maximum versatility across the widest possible spectrum, like frequency, of conflict. Toward this end, the department must continue to reform the way it does business, from developing and buying major weapon systems to managing our workforce. They've managed our workforce all right. They've shut everyone's business down. I thought this was funny. In executing these responsibilities, we must recognize that first and foremost, the United States is a nation at war. I think they mentioned that. In Afghanistan, our forces fight alongside allies and partners in renewed efforts to disrupt, dismantle, and defeat Al-Qaeda and Taliban. In Iraq, U.S. military personnel advise, train, and support Iraqi forces as part of a responsible transition and drawn down. And so I'm going back to this word, support Iraqi forces. On this word, quadrennial, I think that's how you say it, but quadrennial, look at the anagram that you can come up with quadrennial, which means occurring every 4 years. Unladen Iraq. I thought that was kind of interesting. In this little article, it's by brookings.edu, Iraq and Global War on Terrorism. This says, not surprisingly, Iraq is at the center of the jihadists' fundraising and recruitment efforts. Fighting the United States is tremendously popular among radical and even mainstream Islamist circles. Goes on to say, even sheiks critical of Al-Qaeda, I love the cues. You notice all the cues, you guys? Even sheiks critical of Al-Qaeda, however, see the struggle in Iraq as a legitimate defensive jihad. This is true even in countries that are close to the United States, are close allies to the United States. So, legitimate defensive jihad. Now remember, they have a huge, according to the Kissinger report, there's a huge depopulation agenda. So jihad, the struggle or fight against the enemy of Islam. He declared jihad against the infidels. So what better way to